Black Op Radio presents 50 Reasons for 50 Years. Postscript, 1968. Now your host, Len Osanek.
Sirhan Sirhan went on trial in 1969, some 8 months after the assassination. Even as his experienced legal team knew the forensic evidence should have exonerated him, Sirhan ended up facing the death penalty. Distinguished forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht discussed this issue with Black Op Radio.
Insofar as forensic scientific evidence is concerned of an incontrovertible nature, the Robert Kennedy case is even stronger than the John F. Kennedy case insofar as showing the fallacy of the official results. The Robert F. Kennedy case has an autopsy that is outstanding, excellent, and indeed it is detailed, meticulous. We have absolute forensic scientific proof that the shot that killed the senator was fired from a distance of about 1 inch, and it was fired from slightly behind with a forward trajectory. There's no way at all to talk to any of the witnesses that the muzzle of Sirhan's gun was ever 1 inch away from Robert Kennedy's head. No way. Not to mention the fact that Sirhan was in front of the senator and the shot has a back to forward trajectory. That autopsy and the results portrayed by the autopsy was never discussed in the trial. The defense attorney never consulted a forensic pathologist, a criminalist, a ballistics expert for review of the autopsy. No testimony was ever given by such an expert for the defense. When Dr. Noguchi was called to testify by the prosecution, he did set forth the autopsy findings, but the prosecution, of course, did not go into the significant, relevant, and dramatic finding. We had an experienced defense attorney, Grant Cooper. It wasn't a court-appointed novice. He had competent counsel. This testimony would have been dynamite, because then the prosecution would have had to show, and they would not have been able to do so, that Sirhan was in some way, the muzzle of his gun, 1 inch from Robert Kennedy. Grant Cooper, as an experienced defense attorney, was his failure to utilize forensic scientific experts a matter of negligence, of professional incompetence, or was it a deliberate action? Was he in some way paid off, warned off?
Cooper stipulated to the evidence, which means he was not going to argue the evidence of the case. None of the lawyers for Sirhan argued his innocence.
There was no defense of Sirhan, effectively. He was told he was guilty and they were going to try to save his life, and they weren't going to at all contest the state's case. Defense counsel Cooper himself was under indictment for illegally possessing grand jury minutes in another case.
Sirhan was caught in the act. He was obviously guilty, and the only question at the trial that his lawyers had was he of sound mind? Could they claim some sort of insanity defense? Was he just mentally disabled in some way at the time of the shooting that could keep him from getting the death penalty? And the jury decided no. They felt he was in control based on the case presented.
The case presented relied on the investigative work of the Los Angeles Police Department, whose performance has fueled controversy ever since. From CIA operatives to destroyed files.
The RFK case was not investigated through the regular channels of the LAPD. Houghton set up a special unit senator within 48 hours, and this was being run by Manny Pena and Hank Hernandez. Manny Pena was like the captain. He was overseeing the flow of traffic.
It was obviously an open and shut case right from the beginning, with all of the witnesses and the physical evidence, and I don't think it probably could have been handled in any better fashion than it really was.
I don't agree with those who say they did a shoddy investigation. They did a very, very thorough investigation. That's what makes this a little bit more sinister. Stuff that they obviously found has been suppressed because there are hints of missing items throughout the record. But it's not like they didn't try to get to the bottom of it. They sure did. But somebody somewhere up the chain decided certain information either could not be released, needed to be lost, needed to be destroyed.
Wayne Wolfer. Anybody who knows the RFK case understands the shenanigans that this guy did. He essentially was the ballistics expert for the LAPD on that case. And when you start to examine all the stuff that went on in the pantry that night and what the LAPD did later, how they disappeared crucial evidence, like door jambs, which reportedly had revealed bullet holes. There were just too many wounds, too many hits, too many holes. There were just too many bullets being fired that night. And so Wolfer's job was to put together this schematic drawing showing all the ricochets, all the bounces that these bullets took in order to hit their intended targets. This is how determined Wolfer was to keep it to 8 shots. Wolfer had this one bullet going through both Bobby Kennedy and Paul Schrade, except, as we know, Schrade's bullet hit him in the front of the head. When Paul Schrade was alerted to this fact, that this is what Wolfer said happened, he was stunned.
Well, those files were finally released in '88. They finally wound up California State Archives in Sacramento. We were able to find out a lot of information, but we also found out major destruction, a large list of things that had been destroyed right from the beginning. So the fix was in, and we didn't really know this until 1988, 89, 90, when we began checking the files.
We're convinced now there was a second gunman. There was evidence there that the police department had evidence. They actually protected the second gunman and then went after Sirhan, and he was convicted.
How did your office resolve some of the discrepancies in that trial between the medical reports, for instance, that Kennedy was killed by a gun 1 inch from him, and the eyewitness reports of Sirhan's position 3 feet away?
Oh, I don't think there were any major discrepancies. Certainly the jury didn't think so.
Sirhan has had legal representation through all these years. In 2009, his longtime attorney Larry Teeter passed away, leading to the recruitment of William Pepper to press forward the legal issues.
Sirhan has new lawyers. He has William Pepper, and he is trying to get a new evidentiary hearing, a retrial essentially based on the fact that it looks like bullets were substituted. The 1975 panel that looked at those 2 bullets noted different markings on them than the LAPD records showed should have been on them.
You know, one would think that as a matter of law, if you could establish the actual innocence of someone, that could override any of the procedural shortcomings. Unfortunately, that's not the case. The evidence of actual innocence is pretty powerful. In my view, it's much stronger factual evidence than we came across in the King case. I'm not terribly hopeful. These kinds of cases just seem to be shunted aside on procedural grounds so that the merits are just never really raised. And here we had another example of monumental injustice and a critical political assassination which affected all of our lives as country and the world. Because it's a political case, we can expect there will be opposition, polemics, and I think the criminal justice system should not allow such a thing to happen at this point in time. The man has lost 43 years of his life.
We've been waiting for a court to rule. They just will not rule. The evidence is overwhelming. We're trying to get an evidentiary hearing on this case so we can put all this out before a judge, which has never happened. Never happened. They're going to deny us. We're going to probably have to go up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on this thing. They're sitting on it.
This is the travesty of justice, and Len, this is what we're trying to overcome. In my view, we are before, potentially, for our purposes, the best circuit court in the United States. We're going to get an opportunity to argue and seek an evidentiary hearing, which is really what's required. We have to just abide by the court's deliberations and wait until they come forward. If we are denied by the Ninth Circuit, then so far as the case is concerned, officially we're at a dead end. We can petition the Supreme Court, but those applications are rarely granted. This is the posture of the government who really wants to deny any aspect of the truth with respect to these assassinations. We faced this in the King case, and here we go again.
But he's been up on parole 14 or 15 times now, and he has no chance. It's appalling what they do to this guy. They go over his prison record, his associations, the work that he does, petty little stuff. It winds up they're giving him another 5 years so he can get back in 5 years. Destroys the dignity of this guy. It appalls me, and I told him that. They're very philosophical about this. This is the way the system works, and they don't expect anything from these people. I don't either. They're just cold and ruthless about keeping this guy in jail, knowing there's evidence in the files.
Is there anything new on the Sirhan case?
We've exhausted all our remedies in the United States. The Supreme Court has denied certiorari. We're basically finished.
Even the Ninth Circuit, one of the most liberal appeal courts in the country, turned him down. The Attorney General did a terrible job. She's now our senator. She peddled the same nonsense about the case that the prosecution carried for so many years. She fought Pepper and Ducek, great lawyers, did great work. But they're finished.
This case has corrupted every official on the government side who's been involved with it. They may have been honest to begin with, they may have wanted to tell the truth, but somewhere along the line, they're like, uh-oh, you go there and suddenly you're up against powers you don't understand, you don't want to deal with. I mean, in no world was there an honest investigation of this case. What there was from the start was a cover-up.
Stay tuned for the next installment, Postscript 1968.